welcome to The Drop and our Succession Recap podcast. I'm Osman Faruqi. I'm here with Thomas Mitchell and Mel Kembry to break down the final ever episode of Succession. I think I need to talk to my therapist and my parents. I am not sure in what order to do that. This is for a bit of context for this conversation. This is the first time for us since episode 3 when Logan died that we did not receive the episode ahead of time, which means we've pretty much just finished watching it. We're sitting down almost straight away and there's a lot to process. So things might get a bit loose compared to previous episodes. But Thomas and Mel, how's the blood pressure? How are you guys feeling about things right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm in the middle of a panic attack.
You look very stressed.
Yeah.
You got a Kendall vibe.
Yeah, I just feel so many things. I guess very top line, it was an amazing finale. Like the show did itself justice. So for that, I am very glad. I think that's about all going on for right now.
Yeah, I feel as though I'm still processing because usually we do get the episode in advance so we can watch it a few times and we can talk about it.
Can
but
sleep on it.
Here we've kind of come from watching the episode straight to recording, and so we're feeling all of the emotions of it. And I have to say it was fun watching it with you guys here because whoever would have passed our meeting room would have just heard us being like, and and then bursting out laughing. And
it was actually the first time the three of us had watched an episode together. We managed to do it for the very last one.
And we had a real cinema vibe. We pulled down the blinds. And we
There was even like an intermission where we paused it and you booked flights and stuff. It was good.
Every so often, Thomas was like, stop it, to look at like minute details.
Zoom
on the
in,
screen.
enhance. What's going on?
No, but I thought it was fantastic. Like a real genuine Shakespearean tragedy. And Tom says at one point, this is going to be the family death march. And that's what it was.
Yeah, Thomas, I've just got to say, you said that's all I can say right now. We have a whole podcast to get through, so you've got to think about some other things.
Unfortunately, I'm tapping out. So best of luck to you both as you wrap up this show, and I've really enjoyed being a part of it.
You can control the socials from now on.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, I'll be roaming.
I got to say, like, in terms of how the season ended, how this episode went, I feel like I've had some, mild criticisms of the show this season. We've talked about it before. A bit too much plot that they weren't sure how to wrap up. It just kind of felt like some of the episodes didn't really relate to the next ones that went along. But this was maybe the best episode of television I've ever seen. I think immediately after we watched it, we started talking about who's going to get Emmys, and I was like, this is 90 minutes long. This is the feature-length production. Give it an Oscar. Give some of these actors Oscars. It was extraordinary because it sort of wrapped up the story that has run across 4 seasons, I think, so effectively and so powerfully and so completely in sync with the themes of the show. But leaving aside all of that expectation and the weight of how do you finish a show, it was actually just so entertaining and interesting and dynamic, and like the pace was breakneck. Like we had to pause it because we were getting stressed out watching it.
Yeah, the pace was amazing and it never felt like forced or anything. Like when it all begins to kind of, I guess we'll get into it in a minute, but kick into gear. Like it was proper, like I wanted to stand to watch it. Like I just had like nervous energy that couldn't,
There were moments where you were speechless. Like there was a bit where, because you've been a big advocate for Lawrence Yee on the show,
I have.
the Volta guy. And when his name came up, we all pointed at the screen, we all pointed at you, and your mouth was open and you couldn't talk.
Yeah, jaw on the floor. I'm sad that we didn't get to see Lawrence, but yeah, I have been picking that he was going to come back, and then they mentioned him like 10 times in the episode.
It was mentioned so many times.
He was the real star of it.
I know. It is a rare thing for me to be rendered speechless, but
All correct.
Also, and I was all of those things. But yeah, it was pretty incredible, and just, like I think that was my biggest fear going into it was the loose ends. I said it last week, like so many people online were concerned about, oh my God, there's so much to cover. And it just, like nothing, that I can tell in this initial, hour or is it after watching it was really left hanging in the open. It just did such a good job. Everything felt right and fitting.
Yeah, and I think it managed to give the show closure without it feeling forced or kind of fairy tale-esque in the level of closure. It wasn't too ambiguous. It wasn't too settled. It struck that balance really correctly.
So
Oh no, I was just going to say the whole time, speaking to your point about the pressure, like I kept thinking of like the doomsday clock and that kind of minutes to midnight thing of like how close we're getting to watching the end of
Yeah, you kept
humanity.
asking, how long's left? How long's left?
Yeah, because I felt like this pressure of like, oh my God,
Yeah.
it's all happening.
Yeah, what you said, Mel, about how it ended, it didn't feel too definitive or too like unfinished. To me, it was like we talk a lot about the final episode of The Sopranos, which just famously kind of just cuts to black halfway through a scene and leaves everything so ambiguous. This reminded me of a more sophisticated way of doing that, where this was on one hand like a clear end to this show, but there could be another episode. There could have been another scene. There could have been another season. There could have been another 5 seasons. And so you just kind of, it's like the camera just turns away from these characters. We know that their lives are going to move forward in some way. It hasn't like ended them. It hasn't killed them off. It hasn't destroyed what the show's built up of them in the past 4 years. But it also feels so satisfying to leave them at this point. And I think when we talk about what makes a good or bad finale of a TV show, it made me realize that's what makes a good or bad finale, is a sense of closure, but not doing it in a way where you literally like ameliorate the characters.
Yeah, and I think of some of the more recent finales, like Killing Eve, where, you know, the two main characters finally get together, Eve and La Villanelle, and then it ends, spoiler alert, with La Villanelle being shot dead, as opposed to something like Better Call Saul was another recent one I was thinking of, where Saul ends up in jail for the crimes he's committed, where that is an ending, but it was satisfying without feeling kind of like it came out of nowhere to end the show.
Totally. And Breaking Bad, where Walter's like kind of dying slowly at the end, it's like, well, that's the end of that story because he's dead. But the story of these characters is not really over. We have just had enough of them. We've seen what we need to see.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of true to what Succession's always been. It's always felt like watching real people. And, you know, like we were reading an interview, or we were reading a piece this morning that Jesse Armstrong wrote for The Guardian about, you know, I guess the start of Succession. Originally, it was meant to be a faux documentary about a Murdoch-style business. And often it has felt like a documentary. Like, you know, watching Jeremy Strong play Kendall, like I honestly forget that he's an actor. And so it kind of made sense that, yeah, there was no, you know, neatly tied up story. It was just like these people's lives who we've been like excruciatingly putting ourselves through for 4 seasons. You know, our journey with them is over and their lives continue. And it felt like you could almost guess what those next 10 minutes are like for all those people. We just don't get to see it.
Yeah, and we will be doing that at the end of this episode. So
absolutely, yeah.
Stick around for our predictions of what happens to these characters' lives, even though the cameras are off. This episode was pretty unique in terms of its structure because it didn't have like an A plot and various subplots. There was one storyline. It felt like for the first time, every character was heading in the same direction to this conclusion of this dramatic boardroom scene where you got to see everyone in these different locations inch closer and closer to that sort of big bang confrontation. So I think the way we talk about this episode makes sense to do it kind of just scene by scene as the show progresses narratively. Let's start with the setup. So we got Kendall and Shiv. They're in their respective war rooms. Kendall is on the back foot. He doesn't have the numbers to stop the Gojo deal. He doesn't even really know what his brother Roman is going to do. For Shiv, things are on the surface looking a little bit better. She's got the numbers, but as we've discussed before on the show, whenever the show starts with someone in control and like in charge, you know they're being set up for the fall. And I wanted to ask you, given that we now know obviously how it ends, but from that very first interaction between Shiv and Matsson in this episode, kind of got the feeling that things weren't going to go well. Like she was talking so much and he basically is like nodding and giving her the thumbs up. I feel like we were being told from that point, this is not going to end well for Shiv, right?
Yeah, and he's in his grey tracksuit pants and he's like lounging around on the couch and he's chewing his gum as he's speaking to her. And I think you get this hint of disrespect and this hint of frustration with Shiv that had actually been building in a few episodes. Like I remember when we saw them at the funeral scene, he kind of says, oh, hey there to her, and he doesn't follow her advice. And I think he's kind of, he's getting frustrated with Shiv's level of control and power in the situation.
Yeah, I think it's like a universally known rule that if someone's like chewing gum when they speak to you, they're about to fuck you up. Like everyone knows that. They're not listening to you. They don't like you anymore.
And like noisy chewing gum, he wasn't even trying to hide it.
That was an obnoxious chew. Yeah. And also the other thing I thought that was like like a red flag was they're kind of reading. There's obviously been some kind of like profile editorial on Matsson in a US publication, and it's comes complete with a cartoon where it's like, will Matsson rule the world? And he's kind of like she's like a puppet master behind him. It's like a cartoon of Siobhan Roy. And obviously Swedes have no sense of humor. And so he's like, oh yeah, it's really funny, but you can tell he's like not impressed. So it was all set up that like this relationship, her big relationship that she needs, is disintegrating. And you can tell she maybe clocks it too. She's trying really hard to make sure it's all good. But yeah, I guess that was the first sign that, as everyone thought, perhaps the US CEO was not a lock.
I'm glad, Mel, you brought up the tracksuit as well, because it really reminded me of this point in relationships. I'm not talking about specific relationships, just in general. I think a lot of people have experienced this point where one person's kind of over it, and so they don't really care about how they look. They're chewing gum. They don't really care about putting on appearances for the other person. And the other person either hasn't clocked it, or they have clocked it and don't really know how to deal with it other than doubling down. Yeah. It's like, I'll organize this. I'll do this. I've done all this work. I'll go and talk to that person. I'll book this holiday. I'll sort it out. You don't have to worry about it. The other person's just lying on the couch, without shoes, feet up, chewing gum and being like, I don't really care, but sure.
On the day that it's the biggest deal of their lives, the fact that she's all kind of corporate chic and he's just in his old tracky dacks. He's so chill.
Yeah, he doesn't get his business poncho on until a bit later. But
and then the turtleneck and the suit jacket.
Oh, that
my
mustard
God.
turtleneck,
Yeah,
I have thought.
Gosh, all right, we got time to dig into that.
Yeah, there's a bit of an Osman tribute wardrobe in the Matsson look, I think. Like today you're dressed like Logan Roy. You guys, obviously I realize this is a podcast, it's not a visual medium, but
well, it is filmed and put on YouTube, Thomas. I don't know if you know that every episode is filmed and put on YouTube.
I thought that was just for your own personal. Osman is wearing I guess we call it like a rust-coloured,
burnt orange.
Yeah, Logan Roy style cardigan. So
not deliberate, to be honest, but it's worked out well for what we're talking about today.
And you are the centre of this podcast, as Logan was of the show.
Thank you for acknowledging it, Mel. You still have your job. That's great. Thomas remains to be seen. Your employment status will be discussed after we finish this recording. After we have that setup of, I guess, like laying out the stakes, we get a very helpful bit of exposition from Shiv telling us the names, the numbers, where things are at. We then change gears quite dramatically. We go to a family reunion in Barbados, of all places. I love that. I think that's amazing and ridiculous that they squeezed in a quick jaunt to the Caribbean, just as it shows that they've done Tuscany, they've done Southern Europe. Like, why don't we just go to the Caribbean for a family get-together? It was one of my favorite parts of this episode, not just because of the location, but I feel like the regression the siblings went through and the dynamic between their mother helped unlock so much about where this show ended up. And like from the second that Shiv and Kendall rock up, there's like dialogue and costuming choices that are so spectacular. Like Roman wearing the board shorts and the t-shirt, he looks like a 14-year-old. It's like when you go to a friend's summer house or holiday house or whatever, and the only clothes there are what they used to wear 15 years ago when they were a kid. And all of a sudden you look like a kid as well. And then over time, Kendall and Shiv, one by one, change out of their corporate wear into like summer linen. And I found that like really interesting, it felt like a metaphor of them ditching their armor essentially and being like, we're putting away the fighting tools. We're just going to relax and we're going to be emotionally vulnerable for a minute and see what happens. The thing that I thought was the most distressing and sad is that their mother organizes them to get together. And ostensibly, she's taking the high moral ground, right? She's saying, put away the swords. Don't worry about business stuff. For one night, your younger brother's gone through a bit of trauma. I had to patch him back up. Peter's put eye drops in his eyes. Can we just talk as a family over dinner? And they all eventually agree. But she's lying to them. She wasn't there to bring their family together. She brought them there so her husband and his idiot friend could pitch them a business deal. Jonathan could pitch them a business deal. And it's like this whole show, we talk about how Logan is this poisonous influence on their lives. And obviously he is. But every instance of the mum is the same thing. They were kind of fucked from every direction.
Yeah, and I have to say, on Roman's wardrobe, I also love that he had those like beaded bracelets
Oh,
as well.
yeah, where did they come from?
He's like, I'm a super relaxed
Yeah.
guy, just living the Barbados dream here. But yeah, I completely agree with you. I thought the whole idea of this family holiday gone awry was so well done. And at moments, there was kind of a hopefulness, like maybe this is what it all could have been. Like when they were getting on in the kitchen, when they were all going swimming, maybe they could have had this sibling relationship, but then it's always undercut by this darkness of them turning on at each other. So even though for a moment, this is the lives they could have led, immediately they're at each other's throats again.
Yeah, how'd you find the summer getaway, Thomas?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Yeah, I also agree that like I just feel like these guys at this point are like, where else can we quickly go on holidays before this show wraps up and we all have like maybe 12 months of no work.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, agree on Roman. Like it had that vibe of like when you go to a friend's house and you have to borrow their boardies and stuff. Like you just feel awkward and the clothes are kind of like wearing you.
Yeah.
It was a little bit heartbreaking to see that regression. Like when they obviously decide between them what's going to happen, and Kendall again. This is ground that we've really like retraced, but essentially Roman is like the swing vote and Kendall and Shiv are there to pitch him, and they all kind of go for a night swim. Terrible idea. If anyone's seen Jaws, you should never swim at night. But they end up deciding to anoint Kendall, and they have that kind of cutesy scene where they, like we're anointing the king and you got to drink this funny drink with Tabasco and like Peter's special cheese or whatever. And it was kind of cute to see them being really nice to each other, but yeah, it never felt like it was going to last. Like that's the problem with these people in Succession. Like any time you get a glimpse of something maybe real or something maybe really human, it's just, that the world they exist in and the way they've been brought up makes it impossible for that to be a long-lasting thing.
Also, I found that scene so horrifying that the make a meal fit for a king scene. It was so...
Yeah, meal fit for a king and bore on the floor come from the same like bizarro deranged universe, I think.
Yeah, just so much mania to it. And I have to say that the whole family holiday, like when they were on the jetty and they've all agreed that Kendall will be the king, and Kendall does this smile. And I think it's actually the first time I've seen Kendall smile in this entire show.
He's not a natural
he's got
smiler.
Teeth. Yeah.
Well, that was there. There were two bits to the kind of like the childlike innocence that I think created the conditions for them to be able to connect on that level. Like one is that kitchen scene. And like you, Thomas, I felt... Like on one hand, it was so innocent and so ridiculous that you're like, this is what just normal kids are like when they're young. And maybe their lives could have been better if they'd been able to just like enjoy that without the stress of their parents. But you know that that's not going to last. That almost the second they're out of that kitchen, all the other forces will pull them in different directions. But then there is an explicit reference from Kendall just before he's anointed where he says, I was 7 years old, like when Dad told me. Like I've been living with that for 7 years. And he didn't get his dad's sign off. He didn't get that line that wasn't underlined clear for him. He never got that satisfaction. But his siblings saying, you know what, we back you is probably the next best thing. And it makes sense that I think his smile was the biggest we've ever seen before.
He's so happy, and then he's like sitting on the bench with a towel around him, and he's like eating yogurt with a wooden spoon, and his like black hat that he usually has is replaced with this white hat with a cat on it. Like it's just this Kendall.
It's his like silly Kendall hat. Yeah,
all these dreams have come true, and for this moment, he's so happy, and he thinks that this thing will make him so happy, which is also, I guess, the tragedy of it.
Yeah, we're going to get to that one. The tipping point for the siblings ultimately deciding to band together is the reveal that Matsson is actually screwing over Shiv and he wants to appoint Tom CEO. That deal that Matsson and Tom make, they do it over dinner and a couple of vodka shots. I enjoyed that exchange a lot. Like most of the Tom Matsson, head-to-heads, Tom has been shitting himself and is just not confident that he's handled it well. Even in this episode, or in the art gallery, he's just like, what did I say? Like, the colors go well? And Greg's like, colors go well together. Like, that's a sentence.
I'd kind of feel like Tom in every art gallery, though. Yeah, the colors go well. You guys into Shakespeare?
But I particularly enjoyed Matsson bringing up Shiv. Like, I've had this theory for a while that Matsson has this sexual desire over Shiv or this chemistry that they have together. And him putting that out there to Tom, I'm really interested in what you guys think about this. Was he being honest and explaining what the situation was? Or was he kind of testing Tom and saying, the woman that you are still married to, who you're about to have a child with, I kind of want to have sex with her. Are you going to be part of my team or not? Was that a test?
I think it was a test to make sure that Tom was fully submissive to him because we know that Matsson is a bit of a bro, and like when he's dealing with other men, he often enters this machoism and that's his way of dealing with men in business. So I think he put it to Tom because if Tom stood up to him, he would kind of end the relationship. But the fact that end the relationship with Tom, not Shiv, the fact that Tom just kind of bent over and took it and said, of course, you can desire my wife and covet her and try to make it happen if the situation arises. That made him assured that he really was the
And
puppet
I'll eat the
master.
shit for you like I did for cruises and whatever else.
Exactly. Like he literally sits there and is like, I have a high tolerance for pain and physical discomfort. And then Matsson basically gives him the ultimate test there and then like, I want to have sex with your pregnant wife and I probably will. And is that an issue for you? And Tom says no. Like that's just fucking insane that he says that. But, you know, like if you're in Matsson's enormous, probably size 12 shoes, then...
Beautiful shoes.
Not that he wears shoes, but like if you're Matsson, you're like, well, I could not have a better, what does he call him, pain sponge than this guy sitting in front of me. I'm like, I'm like cucking him right now, and he's like prepared to do it. So like, this is the man for me to install as a puppet, and like I'm in the US, and off we go.
But then I was wondering, what is the show trying to say that someone like Tom, who Shiv describes as the person who will suck the biggest dick in the room, like the fact that he is the one that wins, what does that say about the people who rise to power? Like it's maybe these puppets that actually end up on top who are just willing to do what the person in power wants them to do.
In that piece from Jesse Armstrong that Thomas mentioned earlier that we read, to extract from this like compendium that they've put out, which is the scripts of the first 3 seasons. So look that up online if you want more info on it. Jesse talks about characters like Tom, and he says these are these guys who are inexplicably around like beautiful, successful women, and you just see them play this role and manage to suck up and make the right person feel comfortable and be willing to take the hits. And that's how they succeed. And I think that has been a part of the show. Like, I feel like the Carls, the Franks, the Hugos are kind of Toms in 10, 20 years. I think there is that tier of corporate political operator who is willing to just sacrifice themselves and their principles to get a bit of cash, to get a bit of power.
Yeah, I also really liked how thrown Tom was when Matsson said to him, "What kind of vibe are you?" Like,
What kind of hang?
yeah, what kind of hang are you? And I was like, what would you answer to that?
Sort of put me on the spot like that.
A good one.
A laborious one.
I'd have a fun. I reckon Matt and I would get along.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's
we'll-
like trying to test Tom out to see whether he'll hang with the Swedes and go out with them.
Yeah. And the vodka shots is like everyone loves the vodka shot, but Tom still felt really awkward.
Yeah,
doing it,
because you could see also he's never really thought about that. Like he's like, I know strategy kind of, but like
Yeah,
I've never really thought about
the
what
idea
I'm
of
like
actually
as
what partying is that what you want me to do?
yeah, being a friend or a fun guy.
Yeah, I don't know if Tom really wanted to go into detail about his bachelor party and like the last time he tried to organize something like that, because that ended in a dark place.
Can we please have a chat about Greg using basically Shazam for Swedish to like crack open what is going on in this like episode?
It made me wonder, like, so much of what Greg has been doing this season has been feeding intel from the Swedish camp to others. And it's like, how did he build those relationships so quickly? And maybe he didn't. He's just tall and standing, because you often see him on his phone and he's partying and dancing. Maybe he just had that translation app.
No, I reckon it's all from that wild night out they had after the election party.
Yeah, where they
Remember
drank
he
things
went,
they shouldn't have
and
drunk,
he
yeah.
did things he shouldn't have done. Maybe it's bonded there. But also, I think it's another one of those things where Greg just happens to stumble across information as like a passive player.
Yeah, exactly. No one is actually threatened by him. We've said that before. And so
Yeah.
they're happy to chat, even in Swedish, about explicitly what they're going to do to Shiv.
I do wonder about like how accurate that app would be. I don't know, that app probably exists, but like if people are speaking really fast in a different language
At a bar
and
where
you're in
there's
a bar,
music. Yeah.
like the translation could be all fucked up. Anyway, it worked for him. He found out that they were planning to, knife Shiv, and then he fed that information straight to K-Dot.
Before we get to the ramifications of that sort of unfolds at Logan's old house, where Connor and Willa are doing this sort of weird auction of Logan's old stuff. Two things stood out for me from the Connor and Willa stuff. One is that I've made the point that I think that their relationship seems to be the healthiest on this show, because it is transactional and they're honest about it and they have very frank conversations about what each one wants from the other. But in this episode, which I found to be so brutal across the board, where every relationship that you thought there was maybe some tiny little bit of sinew still binding these things together, this just cleaved that right in half. Even with Connor and Willa, it did that, right? Like, Willa is basically saying, oh, Connor's going to go to Slovenia and I'm going to go live my hot single girl life in this mansion here. And he...
Sorry, I think she said she's going to be a playwright.
Yeah, of course, she's going to write plays. Yeah. Sorry, Mel, I'm not trying to undermine her capacity to create art.
Even though the reviews were terrible.
Yeah,
last
yeah,
time she-
yeah.
3 points, Willa.
Great callback. And then she's so obviously perturbed when Shiv points out that Mencken might not win and she might have to stick with Connor. So even that relationship, which was always a bit weird, but like they seem to have figured it out, is like clearly not. Like that reference to the 2-week itch, like this thing, you fast forward their situation and in a couple of weeks, in a couple of months, they're not going to be in a very healthy situation. I found that to be really interesting, and it reminded me of something that J. Smith Cameron, who plays Jeri, said to you, Thomas, last week, that there's like no sentimentality in this show at all. And that's kind of obvious, I guess, when you think about it in that way. Yeah, Willa and Connor were not going to get a happy ending. Like, no one's getting happy endings here. And that brings me to the other interesting thing from this particular scene, the video, the virtual dinner with Logan. It was pretty perfect, but it was missing something, wasn't it, Thomas?
It was, and I made this observation, so thank you for giving me the platform to share my insights. Yeah, no, I thought it was really interesting because, like, it was, again, another kind of off-brand, warm Succession moment, and the kids get, like, obviously emotional watching it. You know, Connor does a funny imitation of Logan doing I'm a Little Teapot, and Carl sings a song, and Logan recites a poem, and it's like, it's really beautiful, and they're all like laughing, and it looks like a really nice dinner party. I'm sad to have missed it. And like the only thing missing was the kids. Like the kids weren't there. And it just was kind of telling and depressing to see like Logan at his probably most warm and the family being so close, like when the kids aren't there. And it tells you a lot about, I guess, where they were. We don't know when this is from. Like, is it kind of in that portion between season 3 and season 4 where they've had the falling out? Maybe, but it could really apply to any time because the kids were basically the bane of his existence and vice versa. And it was like this weird glimpse into, you know, maybe what made Logan happy was not being around his 3 children.
Or also the kind of family that this system has forced him to have, like the corrupted family of capitalism that is the product.
Yeah.
Yeah, having his employees recite like weird saucy limericks.
But Carl, beautiful voice.
Absolutely.
Can't
Carl
hold a
gone for the
tune.
Scottish hymn. Did not see that coming.
I also did like that, speaking about Connor and Willa, I liked that while the siblings are tearing each other apart, the 3 siblings are tearing each other apart, Connor is also like pulling one over them because he's already gone around and he's taken Logan's medals. Like he's already taken what he wants
So, okay,
from the
I
family.
had a question about that. What did Logan have medals from? Like, he was a kid when the war was on. That's why they sent him to Canada. Did he fight in Vietnam or something?
No, he actually nearly came 4th in the Olympics.
Do we have any context to Logan's medals?
I thought maybe
Maybe
he-
it could be like his dad's medals or something like that.
True.
or like maybe he was given an OAM or something, whatever their equivalent is.
An
He's
Order
being...
of Australia.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Rupert
He
Murdoch
could
does
be.
have
Yeah,
one of
he
those
does.
probably, right?
Yeah, he could be knighted at some stage and have that.
It's a fair point. Yeah, it could be. Okay. All right, interesting. Sir Logan Roy.
Logan Roy, yeah.
So the happy get-together, the relatively happy get-together at Connor and Willa's house is interrupted because Shiv and Tom have this confrontation where she basically says she's changing sides because Matsson's going to appoint someone else CEO, and Tom admits that he is in fact the chosen one. That leads to 2 of the best scenes I think the show's ever seen. The first being the fight between Greg and Tom in the bathroom, them going at it. We've seen Tom like hurl stuff at Greg before. We've never seen Greg just like slap him in the face straight away. And Greg's like face there. I was wondering how these actors managed to do that without cracking up because their entire relationship has been so comedic. And for them to be able to, I guess, display that fury, I thought was actually quite impressive. And then right after that, we have Matsson, and I think my favorite part of this episode, right after he's informed that Shiv is switching sides, just goes full the Northman. Wake up, zombies! Ebba! It's so good. I loved it.
And I love that Ebba, like he's yelling for Ebba, and then like the camera pans, and she's just sitting right there in front of him. She's like,
Right here, man.
I'm here.
Yeah,
I'm here.
yeah,
We don't even know what he wanted her for. Maybe he's just been harvesting blood or something. But like, yeah, it was just like this absolute panic. But I loved the scene with Greg and Tom because there's always been this weird, like, almost like awkward teen element to their friendship where they're like, don't really have control of their bodies yet, like as adults or something. And
Yeah,
like
they all feel a bit uncomfortable in
yeah,
their
their
clothes.
fight
yeah.
is very like two kids in the school playground or something, like awkwardly like pushing and fighting but not really committing. And the whole thing was just like a Tom and Greg perfect capsule of like their awkward relationship. And yeah, but I guess we saw Greg kind of, you know, standing up for himself. He's kind of grown to this evolution. It was hard to watch.
And there was also like quite a lot of physical fighting in this episode as people kind of regress further and further, because there's this fight, and then there was obviously Kendall, Roman, and Shiv, and Kendall and Roman get into a fight and they're pulling at Shiv. Then there's the hugging scene where there was that moment of physical violence.
Let's get to that, because that basically brings us to the final 30 minutes of this episode, which were all set in the corporate offices of Waystar, the boardroom scene and the immediate aftermath of that. I mean, this was so interesting because it felt like the show going full circle. Like, I felt like I was back at season 1 with this group of people, with Kendall making the case for why he should be supported, and this lack of certainty, and even kind of Roman shifting. But before we get to the actual vote, let's talk about a couple of things. Firstly, return of our guy Stewie. Very, very fun.
Good to see. Facial hair looks impeccable.
I think him and Kendall, I think he obviously did vote for Kendall in the end, but he is a slippery character, and you saw him embrace Matsson at the end. He was playing, I think, both sides, and I think it was very interesting that Sandy and Stewie split their votes. That felt very strategic. But to go back to a thing that you mentioned, Mel, I mean, the dynamic between Kendall and Roman in the lead up to this vote was probably the part of this episode that made me feel the most sick, like really sick. And it was so hard to watch because Roman has been so emasculated, destroyed, beaten down in the last couple of episodes. He's so weak. And Kendall, in his pursuit of power, does not know how to convince him using arguments or support or encouragement. He just fully becomes Logan. And he does what Logan did to get people on side, which is to physically and mentally torture them. When Kendall brought Roman in and started hugging him, and Roman is kind of sobbing and gasping, took me a while to realize what was going on. I thought he's just sad and he's thinking about dad. And then you realize that Kendall is physically hurting him. He's pressing his wound on his face up against his shirt and opening it, and basically making Roman feel so scared, like he felt with Logan, to support him. It was very hard to watch, I think.
I was actually thinking about this, and maybe I need to go back and watch it a few more times. But then I was wondering if maybe it was a mercy killing on behalf of Kendall, because Kendall has said before that Roman doesn't want it. He just doesn't know how to say no. He doesn't know how to admit that to himself. So maybe Kendall ripping off the Band-Aid and opening the wounds, so to speak, was his way of helping Roman say, okay, I don't look okay anymore. I can't do it. Because after that scene, Roman does say to him, teamwork makes the dream work. So maybe it was not so much an act of cruelty as even if it's a kind of misplaced act of love, to be like, it's okay, step down now. You can't do it anyway. It's mine.
A really interesting defense of physical and emotional abuse in a relationship. Actually, an act of loyalty and love. Interesting. No, sorry. It's an interesting.
Well, I actually kind of agree. So, because if you look at the lead into that, firstly, I was kind of unsurprisingly on Team Kendall, because when Roman's like, we've just been through this whole rigmarole in the Caribbean, and then suddenly Roman's looking in the mirror being like, why can't it be me? And it's like, well, mate, because you cooked it, right? Yeah. So you're out of the running anyway, that's you done. And then he's looking at his wound and stuff, and he's like, oh, it looks okay, and he's talking about the optics and stuff, and then Kendall's like, I would be equally frustrated, and it's like, well,
let this solve the question for you.
You need to bleed.
Okay, I will say I agree. I completely agree with that. I think it was very frustrating. We'll get to Shiv. We'll definitely get to Shiv. But it felt I was so angry. I'm like, you guys just did it. You sorted it out. Yeah. You've got a plan. You've got the numbers. And the second you're in that room, Roman's like, I don't really know. Maybe it should be me. And I think it's completely valid for Kendall to feel frustrated and angry about that. But in a couple of moments, in that moment in particular, and then later on where he gets very physical again, he doesn't seem to have any tool at his disposal other than a physical one to cause physical harm. And I guess that to me feels like the ultimate loss for Kendall, is his previous attempts to win this sort of stuff relied on having a decent strategy, a good idea, convincing people, using words. And for the first time, I think, in the show, he just resorted to physicality, which we've only really ever seen Logan do. And I think that was the ultimate sort of transformation, I think, into a very dark place. And I think his relationship to his siblings, I don't think will recover from that.
And I like the fact that it took place in Logan's office as well, and occasionally there were these pans around the room where you could see these pictures of warriors and Logan with past prime ministers. And I actually think it was maybe a key turning point when Shiv came in and saw Kendall sitting there, and I think he had his legs up on the table, and I think it was that moment of,
she's like, you think you're dad? You're not dad.
Yeah, and I'm not going to let you pretend to be dad either. And can we give a shout out to Dewey as well?
Yeah, which one was Dewey?
I think we were watching it and you were like, who's Dewey? And we momentarily told you it was
they're just
Dewey's younger
for
brother.
the finale, like the most hyped TV show on like Earth. They just hired like 4 extras and chucked them in the final.
Well, we had closed captions on for a moment, and like at one point, one of the board members congratulates Matsson, and it's just like board member 1.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, this is like the most climactic and important sequence the show's ever had.
Yeah, I know. I was like, yeah, it was good to see Sonia again.
Like, they already have 2 Sandys. Do they need a Stewie and a Dewey? Like, come on.
But I guess, I mean, I guess that's an element of the absurdity of the show as well. Like, they never take these things too seriously. It was very funny, Thomas, watching you. You had your spreadsheet open with all the list of names, and you made us pause it a bunch of times. Okay, who's on whose side? I'm like, they'll explain it to us. They'll explain it to us.
Yeah, but the worst thing was as well, the list was like handwritten. So it was like, does that say, was it like,
Is that Siobhan?
does that say Siobhan? Does it say like,
I really enjoyed when we stopped on the zoomed up image and it was just like her with the little tally, like a little child's drawing and taking notes. It's so good.
The other significant twist in this, which happened in the middle of the boardroom vote, is we have the numbers. They're 6-6, and we're all waiting for Siobhan to tell us what to do. And again, I felt your frustration, Thomas. I'm like, we've just all agreed with what to do here. What are you so confused about? You've been screwed over by Matsson. That's the other side here. Why would you support them? That leads to this scene where the 3 siblings go into another room and Kendall just kind of absolutely loses it. Before we discuss his reaction and perhaps how that sealed his fate, what do we think was going on? Like, what prompted Shiv to flip? Mel, you mentioned that maybe her seeing Kendall attempt to be his dad just made her realize this guy doesn't have it. Do you think that was a big part of it?
I think that was maybe a big part of it. Maybe there is a level of grief that is playing into this for all of them, because if someone was to take Logan's place as CEO, that's essentially kind of putting Logan in the past and looking to a new future for the company. So maybe there's a level of grief playing into it. But then also, I got the impression that maybe she was also aware that if Tom was to take the position of CEO, because she's essentially said, I can't do it. Like, I'm not going to do it if it's Matsson. I'm not going to do it if it's my family. But Tom can be CEO. And maybe the idea that she would be Tom's puppet master, and also for the future of her child, is playing in her head as well.
What do you think, Thomas?
Yeah, I think this was probably the only moment of the episode where I was like, this feels a bit like disappointing and like a trick of TV, because you know, we've just seen in the previous scene when she finds out from Tom that he's the one, she like storms into the room with her brothers and she's like irate, like ropeable.
She salts the earth with Tom. It's
yeah,
kinda
she's like, but this is it. We're gonna kill him. We're gonna crush him. And so then suddenly to have this like weird, you know, like inner turmoil about what she wants to do just didn't quite add up to me. Like, it had been set up that maybe Roman was going to flip and he's the second last vote and he hesitates for a minute and then he says no. And, you know, goes with Kendall. And then suddenly Shiv just storms out of the room. And it just didn't quite add up to me. Even taking into account all those things you said, Mel, like, you know, maybe she's thinking about her future with Tom and blah, blah, blah. I just still think it felt like maybe this was a plot device they needed to get the final scene to land, which is fine, but it's not like what you normally expect for Succession. And I think that's probably the only single moment of the episode where I was like, not great. Because it just didn't feel super real to me.
I think so too. I think it felt a bit unearned and a bit confusing, almost like there was a scene missing. Because particularly after the vote, when Tom is celebrating with Matsson and the Swedish crew, the Gojo crew, he says to Shiv, "Oh, I've got a car coming in 20 minutes. Like, I'll meet you there," which suggests that they've had an interaction. Because the last interaction we saw was her screaming at him and basically saying, "This is the end." Something has happened. They did some deal, or they talked about, you know, what the future could be like if she went back on their side. And then, like, you know...
But is it fair that we don't see such a big scene?
No, I agree with you. That's what I was going to say. It's like we can speculate and we can make it make sense. But it feels like it was a 90-minute episode. Give us 2 minutes of Shiv deciding to change sides.
Yeah, but I guess then that would blow that moment. So, I don't know. It just it probably felt like the one thing that was like a trick.
I have to say, I loved that photo op moment at the end after we've all just been through the wars. We're all exhausted. And then it all comes together in the boardroom with this like brief photo op moment of Roman signing it over to Matsson and everyone like politely clapping. And then that's it. It's done. And it's like, oh my gosh, we've just been through so much to get to this moment that is just going to be a little picture in the papers.
I kind of don't really know what to say at this point in this discussion, because we spent like we've been talking for a bit about how we got to this point, but this is like it. This is the moment where the future CEO is anointed, the future of the company is locked in, and the future of the children has been set and signed. And yeah, like it feels like we could spend another hour or two discussing exactly what the consequences of this decision are. But what I found so satisfying about it is that every bit of it made total sense. Like, we've been talking about how we thought this show was going to end in a flat way for the kids, that it was going to leave us feeling a bit down. And it might be because of that, maybe because we'd been thinking and predicting this for a while. Was any part of this conclusion a surprise to you? Was there a particular outcome, whether it's how someone voted or who became the CEO, in this case Tom, how Greg wound up, how Kendall got screwed over, what side Shiv ended on? And I'm not trying to say that like we're geniuses that predicted it. I think the show could have ended in a completely different direction and it would have also made sense. But where the pieces felt like that fit in with the narrative of this story going over 4 years. That's what I guess I'm trying to say. But was there anything that surprised you guys?
I was wondering whether they might have gone harder on the siblings. Like they might have made them end up in a worse spot than what they did. Not that they ended up well, and obviously they've got their families torn apart, their relationships are bogus, they now have lost the family company because of their infighting. But they didn't end up catastrophically damaged, did they? And I was wondering whether Jesse might have gone harder on them each.
I think I guess I was maybe caught off guard by, like, I think last episode we predicted, or I predicted.
I mean, I think it's fair you say we've been joking about like we predicted this, haha, but you came very close to predicting.
Yeah, I think
exactly
I
this,
predicted
really.
that Matsson would oust Shiv and maybe use Tom, and that would be. But I didn't expect that scene. We haven't kind of really touched on it yet, but like the scene where it basically crumbles in this, like, again, another really vitriolic childlike fight between the three siblings when after Shiv decides she wants to change her mind and they like, gather in this boardroom in front of everybody. It's a glass case of emotion, and have this really awful fight, and you can see, like, Kendall can see his lifelong dream, which is like literally like a vote away from him finally being taken away from him, and he just cannot understand why, and neither can I, and he's like falling apart, and then it just goes to these awful areas where Shiv brings up the waiter death, and Roman says horrible things about Kendall's bloodline not being real. And I guess I didn't really pick that we would get one more of those really terrible fights. Like, we had one in the election episode, which was really hard to watch, and they said mean things to each other. And I didn't know we'd get one more of those. And I found that, for all the uncomfortable moments in this episode, I found that like really just like left me feeling like a bit breathless.
And the moment he thinks it's slipping away, he loses that strong facade.
I'm the eldest boy. Like,
Yeah.
that's his
Comes
only
out with
argument.
that. Yeah, and he just like completely wavers, and he's like he becomes so desperate. He's like, I'm the cog. I'm built for this machine. He doesn't know or have anything, and he knows that he doesn't have anything beyond this position, and so he puts everything into it.
He drops like all the spin that he normally says about why he should get it, and he's just like, this is why I think I should get it, because I'm the eldest boy. And
he's like one step from getting down on his knee and begging.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we haven't touched on yet in terms of a thing that people weren't sure was going to get brought up or not was this question of the waiter's death. And I think like we actually almost predicted exactly this. We thought that if it was going to be used, it would be used by Shiv, but that it wouldn't be this sort of like trump card that would change things. It would ultimately just drive a bigger wedge between the siblings. And I think it was an amazing way to deal with it, which is to bring it up, but not as a sort of Deus Ex Machina that changes the direction of the show. But Kendall denying that it was true is so interesting, because either he was lying in season 3 when he told the siblings, and so they think, well, you made up this story to make us emotionally connect with you, fuck you, or he's lying to them now, in which case, fuck you. So the death didn't sort of send Kendall to jail. It didn't really ultimately destroy his chances of being the CEO or winning the battle for control of Waystar, but it did destroy whatever kind of semblance of honesty and good faith he had with his siblings, which is so interesting. And I think very few people thought that that's how a significant issue like a death would fall for this person.
I also think it shows how bad their relationship has become, because it has been, since it happened and since he told them, almost untouchable. Like, it's too big for them to, they don't joke about that. They joke about everything else, but it's this untouchable thing in their lives. And then for Shiv to bring it out in that situation and for him to lie about it, it really shows the degradation of their relationship.
And the whole thing kind of ends in a way that I guess makes a lot of sense when you look at the episode as a whole. Like, Shiv ends up leaving, Roman's like sitting on the boardroom table, and like there's a beat where Kendall is completely silent, and then again he like starts basically gaming again. He's like, okay, well what about we approach Frank? And Roman's just like, it's over, man.
It's
like,
done, dude.
It's over. Like, we're bullshit. She's bullshit. I'm bullshit. You're bullshit. Like, we're nothing. And it's interesting because like he had a conversation with Shiv on the beach earlier in the episode where he says like, maybe dad really didn't want any of us to do this. And it's like, in a way, has Roman finally, for the first time in like 4 seasons, done what his dad wanted him to do, which is like, let none of them have it.
And that's how when we cut to that shot of him having his martini and there was this small smile on his face, that's how I interpreted it as,
yeah, he's like,
I'm free.
Yeah, you
it's
proud of me now,
done.
Dad? Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about where each of the 3 siblings end this show, this episode, this brilliant series. Roman, I think, it was easiest to explain in a way. Like, he feels almost like unburdened a little bit, like that little small smile at the bar by having to deal with all of this shit. I feel like he never really wanted to deal with this stuff, but kind of got sucked into it. And I think ultimately, as he said earlier in the show, Dad never really wanted any of them to inherit the company. I think in a way he feels like he's delivered on his dad's kind of final wishes. The Shiv stuff, as we mentioned, slightly more complex, but that shot in the car where Tom is like the king on the throne putting out his hand and she's like the touching him, but like in the smallest amount possible, that relationship is not in a good place.
No, it's not even, it's like not even a handhold. She just kind of like submits the hand.
Yeah.
Just like flops onto his.
But gosh, their schedules are going to overlap perfectly now that she's got nothing else going on.
Yeah. I don't know if there's anything more you guys want to say about that. I do think like this is an amazing finale, and I'm not trying to like knock it, but I do think that there was one bit that I feel a little bit unsatisfied by, and maybe there's other people listening to this who watched it who've like figured it out, and we haven't. That's great. It is the Shiv dynamic, like what brought her back to Tom to that extent. I don't feel totally satisfied by that.
Yeah.
I kind of wonder if it is that for the sake of her child, if she can't have the CEO position, at least her husband can have it, and maybe her child has an in to the company in the future. And I thought it was kind of funny when they have that conversation earlier on in the episode where she tries to get back together with him, but he doesn't really take the bait, and she says to him, I think I'm ready for a real relationship now. And it's kind of like, is this the real relationship that
on
you
his
wanted?
terms, perhaps. Yeah.
Mm.
And that brings us to Kendall, with Colin in tow, walking to the Hudson.
I have to say, I predicted Colin would come back.
You did?
Yeah.
Thank you.
We all got a lot right this episode. We should pat ourselves on the back.
Yeah, we
None more
got
so
on.
than me.
Turns out when you watch every episode 400 to 500 times and talk about it every day for weeks, you get to figure things out. Yeah. Real brain geniuses over here. Kendall, I thought, more powerful or important in terms of where he's at was what he said in the room with his siblings, where he said, without this, like, I'm nothing. Like, I don't have a reason to be here. And him walking out towards the water, like, that was like a little bit, I think, of us that was like, is he going to go to a bridge? Are we going to end with something more dark? We didn't. But if I'm honest with you guys, and this steps on like one of my predictions for at the end of this episode, I don't think Kendall's alive in a day or a week. I think he has lost his wife and his kids. He's lost his dad. His mum is not a real person in his life. His siblings were the only thing that he really had. They're gone. He's lost the company. He's lost any hope of having the company. His place in this world is gone. I'm not convinced that he lives for much longer.
Firstly, I kind of like the water motif and the idea that I think in the past he's used water and it's been connected with him in these kind of baptismal scenes. And then I think it gets to the point where he's looking at the water and it's like, well, you can't really wash it all the way. Some of it does stick. But yeah, I'm with you. I reckon he's probably hitting the club, maybe with Stewie, maybe. And yeah.
Sonia might pop in.
Yeah. And I think that
Obviously, Ewan will be there.
You delivering a great moment on the board again. But I think Kendall might regress back into the sad Kendall that we've seen in the past. So it's not looking great for him.
Yeah, ice is going to feature prominently in his life.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you're probably right. And he kind of, the series ends with him basically looking out at the water and thinking, like, is this the next step for me? But it also wouldn't surprise me. We kind of said before, if there was another 10 minutes of this, or if we got, a new season and it opened with Kendall in his like high-rise apartment with like 10 sycophants figuring out what his next move is. Like, you know, nothing would surprise me about him. And I guess it's so hard to gauge, you know, and then again, this is the beauty of a show like Succession, which ended itself so well, was that, yeah, like anything can be taken from that ending. It's kind of like the Sopranos trick all over again.
Maybe he teams up with your man Lawrence. That would be like your two favourite characters in the
Yeah,
show.
right. Lawrence wasn't a very big fan of Kendall, but yeah, I mean, who knows? But at least he's got Colin, my best friend. You're my best friend, Colin.
That's what I can see them going. Colin's like, hey mate, I've got a really good therapist. Like,
But also Colin's like when does he stop getting paid? Like,
Well, no, because they sold the company, right? So this is the thing. They've still got billions. And, like, theoretically, they could buy PGN or do the 100 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I guess, like, I've taken a particularly grim reading of this. But, you know, who knows? Maybe they all cool off and he says to Roman, hey, I'm really sorry for what I did to you. It was pretty emotional. How you doing? Like, let's go, you know, create a new media company. Like, that is also a viable path. I don't know why. I think the water thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
the water thing just never signifies something good. And when you've just lost and you've just said, I've got nothing to live for if I lose, and you walk to the Hudson River, I think it's okay for us to speculate that maybe things won't end well for him. We will say more about each of these characters and where we think they end up a little bit later in this episode, but now it's time for our favorite lines. And I got to say, this wasn't maybe like laugh out loud the funniest episode of Succession. I feel like there were fewer moments that I really wrote down. I was like, oh my God, that was so great. But there were a couple of standouts. For me, it was the exchange between Kendall and Greg, when Greg is sort of feeding him the information about Shiv. And Greg is like negotiating, which is something he's learnt in the last couple of years. If I give you something incredible, will you give me something amazing? And that sort of flips later when Kendall says, you know, you give me something amazing and I'll give you something incredible. I just thought it was a great moment between the two of them. Mel, what have you got?
yeah, so mine was when the kids were all together. They're swimming out in the pontoon, which I was thinking was weirdly shot like a horror scene or something. That whole
Oh,
pontoon,
so dark.
yeah, pontoon moment. And they're talking about the future, and they're talking about maybe starting another version of the 100, and Roman can take over social media. And Kendall says to Shiv, "Don't be all fucking Joan of Waystar." And it's a great moment. And also, here's a free little fun fact for you. Sarah Snook played Joan of Arc at a Sydney Theatre Company production not that long ago. Some of us don't just watch TV, Thomas.
knew it was coming.
Yeah. And so I've already seen that there's been heaps of tweets of, because there was a lot of publicity around Sarah Snook as Joan of Arc, dressed
Right.
as Joan of Arc.
Right.
So lots of
So people are bringing that up.
Yeah, they're bringing
Oh,
that
wow.
up and saying Joan of Waystar. So I think Shiv's got a lot of fans.
Great. Thomas, what about you?
Yeah, agree. It wasn't like a episode that was like bangers every 2 seconds,
Oh,
but
have we heard that before?
yeah, the writing's just really. Jesse Armstrong dropped the ball. No, but there was one I thought that was very funny, and I think I've given Matsson a few lines of the week. So props to him. During the kind of Tom interview, like singing for his supper situation, Matsson says to him, "Why didn't I get the guy who put the baby inside instead of the baby lady?" And like in so many ways, it's
Fair
so
question, fair question.
offensive. And like, you know,
For the record, not a fair question.
but to like sit there opposite this guy and be like, reduce, you know, him and his wife to just like objects and baby makers and, you know, like the baby provider. But also he's like, just 2 beats ago said, I'm also going to sleep with your wife, probably.
And and an incredible move from him where he starts the episode reading that magazine with the cartoon where Shiv's the puppet master. Now he's in charge of Tom, and Tom has managed to take control of like puppet master Shiv. So he's orchestrated this quite beautifully for himself.
And he starts in a tracksuit and ends in this like glorious mustard sweater.
I did say we would come back to that.
Thank you.
His fits are always incredible.
They are.
It's been, I think, part of what has made the season special is not just his outfits, but like his whole presence has been extraordinary.
Yeah, I really think he's injected a breath of fresh air into the season, and he's a really good contrast to the siblings.
Okay, so at the start of this podcast, we had to pick a character who was not a major character, and we had to kind of follow them each episode and see where they popped up, and we kind of just randomly decided to make that Jeri. And I feel like we were vindicated for it, not only because you, Thomas, got to interview her last week, which is brilliant, but she's been the perfect character for this.
She really has been.
Does pop up at these really central moments. And here she popped up a couple of times. She popped up in the video, as we mentioned, at the virtual dinner party, telling that limerick. And then at the end of the episode, as we've been saying all along, she is a survivor. She's the cat with 9 lives. She's back in the center of it. Tom wants her at his right hand. Really impressive stuff from Jeri.
And also, in her last moment, she brought Roman such distress because he couldn't even bear the fact of her being in the office.
She was really the catalyst, right, for Roman
Yeah.
kind of flipping out.
Yeah, and she was never on Matsson's hit list, so she always was going to be saved. Yeah, I loved it. She was already kind of probably unpacking her office.
Yeah, that was a great win for Jeri because I love how we got like a snippet of Frank and Carl where they like just as Tom's like being anointed and celebrating, they kind of say to each other like, "What are you thinking, golden parachute?" Like little do they know that like Tom is
done.
planning. Yeah, he's like they're dead, don't need them. But yeah, immediately he's pretty much like, "I want to talk to Jeri," and like here we are, what are you, like 39 episodes now,
Yeah.
and she has proven time and time again that she will not be beaten. She just like she did it to Logan. She'll probably end up doing it to Tom. And yeah, like Gerri-watch,
But now she's going to have to work overtime to try to get Matsson out of the whole blood brick situation. Like
She knows what she's signing up for.
Yeah.
In terms of the other two greybeards sort of having this chat about the golden parachute, they smuggled in one of the most brutal lines the show's ever had. What are you thinking? It's like, I think we should have slit his throat in the crib. I'm like, that's insane. But maybe speaks to like, I don't know, the contempt they've sort of had for the kids all along, which is they've had to play babysitter and uncle to them, but they've just thought they were spoilt brats, which is ultimately what they were revealed to be.
And also shows the lie to that family scene that we were all kind of pining over, that Carl's singing this lovely ballad and then.
But I
also
think
at the
Carl
same
does
time-
respect Logan, and I think, as we were saying before, that dinner was so great because the kids who everyone hates and thinks are morons weren't there. They're probably planning the 100 and Dubai or wherever they were at the time.
Imagine how much they would have been bitching about the kids at that dinner. How weird is Kendall?
All right, fun fact corner time, and Mel, you for the very last episode get to be in the driver's seat.
Which is an enormous stitch up, and I'd just like to take this moment to apologise to the listeners that I have been knocked off Fun Fact Corner.
You were less knocked off and more you were so stressed about what to say on this podcast, you disappeared for half an hour, and so Mel kindly volunteered.
That is true, yeah. All that is true.
Someone had to step up to the plate. Also, I like to think this is a reflection of my how well I did last week as Detective
Mel, been
when
promoted to fact
to
Mel. Yeah.
Fun fact,
Fun
please.
fact, Mel,
not
sorry.
I thought this
just
might have been like
facts.
Sexy Fact Corner and you're going to talk about Roman again.
I've got
Sexy
thoughts.
Dream Corner
Yeah.
with Mel.
So
what, have,
Roman and I are in the Caribbean.
We're both in linen. Okay.
what have you got? What have you
Okay,
got?
what have I got? So we were just talking earlier about a meal fit for the king scene, which we all absolutely adored. And I went back and watched that, and I'd like to let you know some of the things that were actually going into that dish. There were baked beans, yogurt, Tabasco. There was Peter's cheese and knobby. What is knobby? It looked
Nobby
like...
was frozen bits of the end of bread, like the end of the loaf, which is all crusty.
Yeah,
I
okay.
believe,
Do you
yeah.
call them knobbies?
No, they explained it in the episode.
No, they did, but
Yeah.
just
No, I don't
no.
call bits of bread nobbies.
Okay, great. That's a successionism. Orange juice. There was some pickle in there, some curry powder, egg.
So sorry, when you're
everything.
saying all of these things, these were real things they put into this blender.
Yes.
Oh, wow,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, this was all on the. I was just doing a bit of like zooming in on all the.
Okay, wow.
All the food around it. So, and as we saw, Kendall actually drank this smoothie.
This is a real thing you drank.
Well, yes, and as we know, Jeremy Strong, famously a method actor,
True,
much
true.
mocked for it. In actually filming this scene, he did really drink the drink, and he had it so often that apparently he went outside after they stopped filming and threw up.
Wow.
So-
I mean, I felt like throwing up watching it. Like I saw you turn your head away
Yeah.
when he went to drink it.
Yeah, and then it ends up all over him. So I think that's. I know I've been harsh on Kendall, but Jeremy Strong, what a
Props.
stellar performance.
One little extra fun fact addendum from me. We had a fun fact, I think, way back at the start of this podcast about the name of Tom and Shiv's dog, Mondale. Mondale got a shout out today in the weird kind of poem that Logan recites, which is made up of the names of all the people who've lost presidential elections. And I love that he has a go at Clinton, but he's kind of implying that Hillary Clinton was like the worst Clinton. But he brings up Mondale.
Yeah.
So there you go. That's
And we were saying Mondale's a bit of a winner of this episode because his family's back together
That's
again.
a good point. Mondale was the winner of this episode because Mondale has not been getting a lot of love this season. He was probably quite stressed about his parents fighting, but he'll have two
He
parents.
was also in
now.
that crate, remember?
I do remember. No, I think a lot about Mondale's terrible treatment, and it makes me very stressed about this kid that is happening and how it's going to be treated.
But also, like, of course, Logan's party trick is to recite a bunch of presidential losers. Like, seriously, man, get some better chat.
Really, I recite Berryman at my parties.
Yeah, I know, but that's why no one goes to your parties.
It's embarrassing for me to admit that I was like, when he mentioned the names, I was like, oh yeah, 32. Oh yeah, cool. 48. All right. Nice. I know when these elections were held. Yeah, weirdly obsessed with miserably failing political candidates. Anyway, moving on to winners and losers. So obviously, like, kind of self-evident who won and lost in this episode. But I thought it'd
Colin.
be... Yeah, are you Mel now? Giving points to random people?
Well, she took Fun Fact Corner, so I feel like we've done like
I thought it'd be interesting just to do a final reflection on kind of where we ended up. And this was always like a bit of fun. We weren't kind of trying to be too objective and have too much of a rigorous process around it. But we didn't nail Tom as number one. In our final ranking, we had Kendall on top, 31 points, and Tom just behind him on 28, followed closely by Shiv on 25. And I think that did reflect where the show was going. Kendall was being built up as a potential successor, and Tom and Shiv were doing quite well. And I feel like, it shows we paid attention, basically. Any final thoughts on how our rankings went?
This has been such a affirming podcast for us, hasn't it? A lot of it has been we've been right. I guess if you were to say, okay, so say we redid it instead of power rankings to people who actually got what they wanted at the end, how would you redo that? Because you'd have to put Roman up the top there.
Yeah, it's a good point. I kind of think
shocking for you.
I think in a weird way, if you kind of play the tape out to the end, almost every character is sort of like probably going to be better off. Except for maybe Kendall, because of just how kind of broken he is.
I don't know. Greg was earning like 250 grand. Now he's on like 20, 30, maybe 40.
That's actually true. Yeah. I mean, Greg is probably earning more than he was as Doderick and probably having a better time.
If I lost $210,000 in a day, I would go to the Hudson River and jump inside.
Well, depending on how this podcast goes, you might be losing a salary. So,
Yeah, but it's not that big.
I feel like Shiv didn't ended up quite badly too. Like, I can't see her and Tom's relationship working where she's not, the in the position of power and she's not the one who's the breadwinner in the relationship.
Okay, so that brings us to our regular predictions segment, but with a twist because there's obviously no more episodes to go. But I thought it'd be interesting to ask you guys where each of Roman, Shiv, and Kendall may end up if there was another episode or another season of this show. I personally think that Kendall, he's not having a good time. I'm not convinced that he lives for much longer because he had said explicitly that he really didn't have much to live for if he didn't win this. But I feel more confused or like a bit uncertain about where Shiv and Roman go. What do you think, Mel, about the future of these siblings?
Okay, so say we were to have Succession season 5, episode 1. I reckon it opens at the kind of birthday party of the new baby, Shiv and Tom's birthday party. I think Kendall comes in off his face. He's high, he's the loose cannon. Everyone kind of, oh, Uncle Kendall, what a mess. So he comes in completely unhinged. I think Roman comes in, he's happy. Tabitha's back with him. He's maybe dressing up for the kids' party. He's got the Doderick. They're now making fun of it. And then I think Shiv and Tom are playing happy families for now. And I think Shiv is controlling Gojo from behind the scenes, and her and Tom are planning to take over some of the shares of that company and win back Waystar for the family.
I wish I could commission you. I would watch that. That is compelling.
You can commission me.
I'm shocked that you didn't predict Logan's funeral. I think that, I think I see what you're saying about Kendall being possibly dead. It felt like that, but taking like a less grim prediction, I could also see that if there was a season 5 episode 1, it opens with Kendall like back in the war room. He's fucking blasting Jack Harlow, and like he's got like 10 people around him who are setting up 10 different Twitter accounts, and he's just got TikTok, and he's like all ready to go again. He's cooked up some like harebrained scheme to get back in the game. I do think that, we're probably right in saying like the justification, I suppose, for Shiv doing what she did, if we're being generous to justify that plot point, is maybe she thought, okay, I'll let Tom take this win, because ultimately the entire dynamic of our relationship is that I can mind fuck him whenever I want. And so maybe she's back with Tom, they've got the baby, and she's like got her claws back into him, and so she's kind of in the game. And Roman, I reckon, if they had another episode, I dead set reckon he would be like running 100. He was so keen on it. It was like his thing. He was driving it. He seemed like the most like passionate and engaged we've ever seen him. And you can tell like the way he's been throughout the whole show, he's always wanted something, like he wants a job that he's like knows he's good at, and he can be like task driven. So he comes in, he started wearing like slogan tees and stuff, and he's running the 100, and that's where everyone's at.
Also incredible. Like, this is Jesse Armstrong, if you're listening. Well, you're not.
I mean, never say never.
Get these guys to write a show.
What about you, Oz? What do you think?
I actually don't have anything more compelling and interesting than that from both of you. I mean, I do think that I do think that the show, the family dynamics are what have been so compelling, and so I'm really attracted to your idea, Mel, of like, and you sort of said this last week, Thomas, about how it might end with like the birth of the son and what it means for the cycle continuing anew. I'm kind of really interested in that idea and whether Shiv thinks she can break that in some way and how she tries to do that, because Logan never really tried to break it, but this generation of kids feel like they know what the problems are. And maybe we follow in 20 years' time, like Kendall's kids and Shiv's kids as they try and grapple
Kendall's fake
with what's
kids.
going on. Kendall's fake kids, yeah. Yeah, a bit of a weird reveal there as well. You know, we finally got the confirmation that the one kid's adopted and the other kid's like a love child from a separate relationship.
I also think my final little like addition to that, I reckon Greg and Ebba would be having a legit relationship.
That is a good call.
Yeah, I just feel like they kind of occupy the same weird role, and I could see them like having a good vibe.
Would also watch that. Maybe we should just like, from when this podcast finishes, just read out scripts of new episodes of the show that we write in between. Before we say goodbye to this series, is there any final thoughts that you guys had on the show, on the kind of themes that the show's brought up?
I believe it was Shakespeare that. No, I think like, you know, this has been an incredible show, and I'm midway through writing this recap, which hopefully everyone listening will read. And trying to figure out what to say. But like, essentially, I thought was pretty amazing about this episode was that it was like this 90-minute microcosm of the entire show. Like the issue from the first 10 minutes of the first episode was who will succeed, and will any of these kids be able to get out of their own way to do it? And the episode basically took us through like every permutation of that again, and ended up with the same result as it that they can't. They're too hamstrung by their history and their self-absorption, and they sabotage, and it's ultimately because they've never had to do any kind of like fighting to survive. It's been given to them, and they just don't have that in their DNA. And I just thought it was amazing that in 90 minutes, which I had serious concerns about, they retraced the entire thing again. So like, honestly, probably the best TV finale up there with Sopranos, if not better.
I'm really looking forward to watching some Yellowstone for a bit.
Come on, let's do it. Let's do a whole Yellowstone rewatch podcast. Let's go.
Let's do it. Sinking my teeth into that. And then actually, I'm kind of interested to go back at some point and watch Succession, all the seasons together quickly, because I feel like there's probably so many throwbacks to earlier episodes that we've picked up on a lot of them, because as we've been saying this whole episode, we're very astute commentators. But I feel like you'd get something from watching them all back to back, and it'll be interesting to see too how much endings matter in the streaming era as well, because when you can watch them all again close together all in one hit, I think it'll give you a different perspective.
That's really interesting. Yeah, my main thought from the last few episodes in particular has been just how the show has become more and more a real-time commentary on what's happening in politics in media. Like the episodes where Matsson and Mencken are making deals to help each other out. Like in the last week, we have seen Elon Musk and Ron DeSantis work together to announce his presidential campaign. Like that happening the week that we saw them talking to discuss how they would boost the algorithm to help Jared Mencken is kind of crazy. And there's no show doing that as well as this. And this is not even a show that is about like politics. This is a show that is about family dynamics, media stuff, and corporate battles. And yeah, I will miss it a lot. Like Jesse Armstrong is so good that he'll be back with something else. But yeah, I hope that there's like people who are making TV, producers, execs, writers, actors who watch this and realize you can like take a big swing and you can have a show that doesn't have big stars at the start. We've talked about that before, and is a bit weird and has totally crazy characters and plots. But if it has important things it wants to say about the world and is funny and is emotionally heartfelt, people will connect with it. This isn't like a big showy CGI fest like Game of Thrones, which has sex and blood and violence, right? This is the opposite of that. And it's been more important, I think, to our conversation about how the world works and like what art should do. So I'm really excited that we've got to do this, and I'm excited about what people who watch it create next, basically. And it's also been a blast chatting with you guys every week. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was quite moving, and the fact you've said it in Logan Roy's cardigan it just made it even more powerful.
I mean, there was some blood and violence in this last episode, but just a hint.
No
but yes, there will be a big hole, I think, in everyone's viewing schedule now, which you can, of course, feel on Wednesday night with the State Against State battle, State of Origin on Channel 9.
it is the right way to end this podcast by saying up the blues.
Yeah.
And you've kept your job.
I know. I got in there right at the end.
Well done. Thomas and Mel, the three of us are going to be back. More information to be revealed soon about what we're doing next on this podcast. But thanks for the chat over the past couple of months. Thanks to Meg as well, who was so wonderful at kicking things off, who we miss a lot. Thanks heaps.
It's been an absolute pleasure and just occasionally a bit stressful.